In the 6th century, the Mediterranean formed a vast economic network linking Africa, Europe, and Asia through relentless maritime trade. Egypt stood at the center of this system, supplying enormous quantities of grain to sustain the Byzantine Empire. Ships departed Alexandria constantly, carrying food, merchants, soldiers, and travelers across thousands of kilometers of open sea. Within the dark interiors of grain warehouses, unseen ecosystems thrived among sacks of wheat harvested along the Nile. Cargo vessels loaded with Egyptian grain became floating corridors of commerce moving steadily across the Mediterranean world. Hidden among cargo and timber, something small and unnoticed was already beginning its silent journey. Each year, the Nile flooded Egypt's fields, leaving behind fertile soil that produced immense harvests of grain. Farmers harvested wheat across the delta, forming the agricultural backbone of the Byzantine imperial economy. From rural villages, grain traveled downriver in large barges bound for the immense warehouses of Alexandria. The port city functioned as one of the most important commercial hubs in the Mediterranean world. Imperial administrators carefully recorded shipments destined to feed distant populations throughout the empire. Yet within this vast logistical system, unnoticed biological passengers were quietly multiplying among the grain stores. Among the grain sacks of Alexandria's warehouses lived large populations of black rats feeding on scattered wheat. These rodents had long followed human trade networks, thriving wherever food supplies accumulated in large quantities. Hidden within their fur were fleas carrying a bacterium now known as Yersinia pestis. When infected fleas fed repeatedly, the bacteria multiplied inside their digestive systems, blocking normal feeding. Unable to swallow blood properly, the fleas bit new hosts again and again in desperate attempts to feed. Merchant ships unknowingly transported these infected animals across vast maritime routes of the Byzantine economy. Within weeks, invisible biological stowaways were moving silently between ports of the Mediterranean world. The first recorded cases appeared quietly among residents of Alexandria's crowded port districts during the early months of 541. Patients developed sudden fever, weakness, and painful swelling in the lymph nodes of the neck and groin. Physicians of the Byzantine world had no explanation for the rapidly progressing illness. Within days, some victims fell unconscious, while others died shortly after the first symptoms appeared. Because early cases seemed isolated, daily commercial life across the city continued without interruption. Medical practitioners attempted traditional treatments, relying on inherited Greek and Roman theories of disease. Unseen biological forces were already spreading silently through one of the Mediterranean's most densely populated cities. Within weeks, isolated illness transformed into a widespread epidemic throughout the crowded districts of Alexandria. Entire households suddenly fell ill as the mysterious disease spread rapidly through densely populated neighborhoods. Physicians struggled to understand the illness as patient numbers increased beyond their ability to provide care. Fear spread quickly as deaths began occurring across multiple parts of the city. Funeral practices could no longer keep pace with the growing number of victims. Commercial activity at the harbor slowed as laborers, sailors, and merchants became increasingly affected. Authorities resorted to large burial trenches outside the city as mortality continued rising. Alexandria, once the empire's vital grain port, had become the epicenter of a devastating epidemic. The disease did not remain confined to Alexandria's crowded harbor districts. Trade boats carried merchants, laborers, and infected rodents deep into the Nile's network of river cities. Within weeks, settlements along the river began reporting the same sudden fever and fatal swellings. Small towns lacked physicians and resources capable of confronting the rapidly spreading epidemic. Local markets closed as fear spread through agricultural communities that depended on constant trade. Some villagers attempted to flee inland, unknowingly carrying infection into previously untouched regions. The Nile, Egypt's lifeline of commerce and transportation, had become a corridor for the advancing plague. As mortality increased, Alexandria's social and administrative systems began to deteriorate rapidly. Officials struggled to maintain order while large portions of the workforce succumbed to illness. Funeral practices collapsed under the overwhelming number of dead requiring burial each day. Religious leaders attempted to perform rites, but even clergy increasingly fell victim to the disease. Grain warehouses and markets stood silent as economic activity nearly ceased. Fear drove many citizens indoors as rumors and uncertainty spread throughout the population. Agricultural production along the Nile slowed dramatically as farmers abandoned infected communities. The great port that once sustained an empire now struggled simply to survive the unfolding catastrophe. The plague did not remain limited to Egypt's river cities and coastal ports. Merchant vessels continued sailing across Mediterranean trade routes connecting the Byzantine Empire's major urban centers. Infected rodents and fleas traveled silently aboard ships moving between Alexandria and distant ports. Soon reports of unexplained illness began appearing across several regions of the eastern Mediterranean. Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, stood directly within the network of these trade routes. Imperial authorities received alarming accounts describing rising mortality in multiple provinces. An epidemic that began quietly in Egypt was now spreading across one of the largest empires of the ancient world. Modern microbiology has revealed that the epidemic was caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. This organism survives within fleas that parasitize rodents living near human settlements. When infected fleas bite humans, the bacteria enter the bloodstream and multiply rapidly. The infection attacks the lymphatic system, producing painful swellings historically described as buboes. For centuries, historians debated the exact nature of the Justinianic Plague. Only modern genetic research confirmed that the ancient pandemic was indeed caused by the same bacterium responsible for later plague outbreaks. The plague drastically reduced populations across parts of the Byzantine Empire during the mid-6th century. Labor shortages disrupted agriculture, trade, and imperial administration throughout affected provinces. Historical records suggest the pandemic returned in repeated waves over the following 2 centuries. Scholars continue to debate how deeply the disease reshaped the political and economic stability of the empire. Modern global transportation networks now move people far faster than ancient trade routes ever could. Public health systems attempt to detect emerging pathogens before they spread across continents. Yet, the biological mechanisms behind pandemics remain fundamentally similar to those of the ancient world. Across centuries of human history, invisible organisms have repeatedly altered the course of civilizations.